This joke delivers. A gynecologist had a burning desire to change careers and become a mechanic. So she found out from her local tech college what was involved, signed up for evening classes, and attended diligently, learning all she could. When the time for the practical exam approached, she prepared carefully for weeks and completed the exam with tremendous skill. When the results came back, she was surprised that she had obtained a mark of 150%. Fearing an error, she called the instructor, saying, "I don't want to appear ungrateful for such an outstanding result, but I wondered if there had been an error that needed adjusting." The instructor said, "During the exam, you took the engine apart perfectly, which was worth 50% of the total mark. You put the engine back together again perfectly, which is also worth 50% of the mark. I gave you an extra 50% because you did all of it through the muffler." A young boy enters a barber shop, and the barber whispers to his customer, "This is the dumbest kid in the world. Watch while I prove it to you." The barber puts a dollar bill in one hand and 2 quarters in the other, then calls the boy over and asks, "Which do you want, son?" The boy takes the quarters and leaves. "What did I tell you?" said the barber. "That kid never learns." Later, when the customer leaves, he sees the same young boy coming out of the ice cream parlor. "Hey, son, may I ask you a question? Why did you take the quarters instead of the dollar bill?" The boy licked his cone and replied, "Because the day I take the dollar, the game is over." Here is a joke to tell someone before they go into surgery. A beautiful young woman about to undergo a minor operation is lying on a gurney in a hospital corridor awaiting the medical staff. A man in a white coat approaches her, lifts up the sheet, and visually examines her naked body. He walks away and confers with another man in a white coat. The second man then approaches the girl and performs the same examination. When a third man approaches her, she asks impatiently, "These examinations are fine, but when are you going to start the operation?" He shrugs and says, "Your guess is as good as mine, lady. We're just here to paint the halls." A salesman is driving toward home in northern Arizona when he sees a Navajo man hitchhiking. Because the trip had been long and quiet, he stops the car and the Navajo man climbs in. During their small talk, the Navajo man glances surreptitiously at a brown bag on the front seat between them. "If you're wondering what's in the bag," offers the salesman, "it's a bottle of wine. I got it for my wife." The Navajo man is silent for a while, nods several times, and says, "Good trade." A man has 6 children and is very proud of his achievement. He's so proud of himself that he starts calling his wife mother of 6, in spite of her objections. One night they go to a party. The man decides that it's time to go home and wants to find out if his wife is ready to leave as well. He shouts at the top of his voice, "Shall we go home now? Mother of 6? His wife, irritated by her husband's lack of discretion, shouts right back, "Anytime you're ready, father of 4. An 80-year-old man went to his doctor for his annual checkup. The doctor asks him how he's feeling. The 80-year-old says, "I've never felt better. I now have a 20-year-old bride who is pregnant with my child. What do you think about that?" The doctor considers his question for a minute and then begins. "I have an older friend, much like you, who is an avid trophy hunter and never misses a season. One day when he was going out hunting, he was in a bit of a hurry and accidentally picked up his walking cane instead of his gun. When he got to the creek, he saw a prime beaver sitting beside the stream of water. He raised his cane and went bang, bang. Suddenly, 2 shots rang out and the beaver fell over dead. What do you think of that?" The 80-year-old said, "I'd say somebody else pumped a couple of rounds into that beaver." The doctor replied, "My point exactly." This story is funny. 2 married buddies are out drinking one night when one turns to the other and says, "You know, I don't know what else to do. Whenever I go home after we've been out drinking, I turn the headlights off before I get to the driveway. I shut off the engine and coast into the garage. I take my shoes off before I go into the house. I sneak up the stairs. I get undressed in the bathroom. I ease into bed and my wife still wakes up and yells at me for staying out so late." His buddy looks at him and says, "Well, you're obviously taking the wrong approach. I screech into the driveway, slam the door, storm up the steps, throw my shoes into the closet, jump into bed, rub my hands on my wife's ass, and say, 'Let's do it.' And she's always sound asleep." A man had just settled into his seat next to the window on the plane when another man sat down in the aisle seat and put his black Labrador retriever in the middle seat next to the man. The first man looked very quizzically at the dog and asked why the dog was allowed on the plane. The second man explained that he was a DEA agent and that the dog was a sniffing dog. "His name is Sniffer, and he's the best there is. I'll show you once we get airborne when I put him to work." The plane took off, and once it has leveled out, the agent said, "Watch this." He told Sniffer to search. Sniffer jumped down, walked along the aisle, and finally sat very purposefully next to a woman for several seconds. Sniffer then returned to his seat and put one paw on the agent's arm. The agent said, "Good boy," and he turned to the man and said, "That woman is in possession of marijuana, so I'm making a note of her seat number and the authorities will apprehend her when we land." "Say, that's pretty neat," replied the first man. Once again, the agent sent Sniffer to search the aisles. The lab sniffed about, sat down beside a man for a few seconds, returned to its seat, and this time he placed two paws on the agent's arm. The agent said, "That man is carrying cocaine, so again I'm making a note of his seat number for the police." "I like it," said his seatmate. The agent then told Sniffer to search again. Sniffer walked up and down the aisles for a little while, sat down for a moment, and then came racing back to the agent, jumped into the middle seat, and proceeded to shit all over the place. The first man was really grossed out by this behavior and couldn't figure out how or why a well-trained dog would behave like that, so he asked the agent, "What's going on?" The agent nervously replied, "He just found a bomb." Don't listen to this joke at church. One rainy Sunday afternoon, a young couple were on their way to their church to get married. On the way there, their car lost control and slammed into a telephone pole, killing them both instantly. The couple soon found themselves standing in front of St. Peter at the pearly gates, welcoming them to heaven. The young woman asks Peter if they could get married in heaven, since their time on earth was cut short. He replies that he'll get back with them on that request. A month later, St. Peter finds them and announces that they can, in fact, get married in heaven. To his surprise, the woman asks, "Just wondering if things don't work out, will we be able to get a divorce?" With a stern look in his eye, Peter blurts out, "Look, lady, it took me a month to find a preacher up here. You really think I'm going to find a lawyer?" An older man goes to the doctor in desire of a prescription for Viagra. The doctor looks over the man and says, "Viagra can be very dangerous, and we do not just dispense it indiscriminately. Please bring your wife to my office next week and we'll discuss this in more detail." So the following week, he shows up with his wife. The doctor asks to see the wife by herself for a few moments, and she follows him back to the examining room. The doctor asks her to disrobe, and she does. He then asks her to turn around in 360 degrees a few times, then instructs her to get up on the examining table and to turn in various positions. He then tells her she can get dressed and goes out to meet the male patient. "Sir," the doctor says, "there is nothing wrong with you. I couldn't get an erection either." I can't stop laughing at this joke. A young man moved into a new apartment on his own and went to the lobby to put his name on his mailbox. While there, an attractive young lady came out of the apartment next to the mailboxes wearing a robe. The boy smiled at the young woman and she started a conversation with him. As they talked, her robe slipped open and it was obvious that she had nothing else on. The poor kid broke into a sweat trying to maintain eye contact. After a few minutes, she placed her hand on his arm and said, "Let's go to my apartment. I hear someone coming." He followed her into her apartment. She closed the door and leaned against it, allowing her robe to fall off completely. Now nude, she purred at him. "What would you say is my best feature?" Flustered and embarrassed, he finally squeaked, "It's gotta be your ears." Astounded and a little hurt, she asked, "My ears? Look at these breasts. They are full and 100% natural. I work out every day. My butt is firm and solid. Look at my skin. No blemishes anywhere. How can you think that the best part of my body is my ears?" Clearing his throat, he stammered, "Outside, when you said you heard someone coming, that was me." The nurse could not stop laughing at this joke. An extremely modest man was in the hospital for a series of tests, the last of which had left his bodily systems extremely upset. Upon making several false alarm trips to the bathroom, he decided the latest episode was another and stayed put. He suddenly filled his bed with diarrhea and was embarrassed beyond his ability to remain rational. In a complete loss of composure, he jumped out of bed, gathered up the bed sheets, and threw them out the hospital window. A drunk was walking by the hospital when the sheets landed on him. He started yelling, cursing, and swinging his arms violently, trying to get the unknown things off, and ended up with the soiled sheets in a tangled pile at his feet. As the drunk stood there, unsteady on his feet, staring down at the sheets, a hospital security guard, barely containing his laughter, and who had watched the whole incident, walked up and asked, "What the heck is going on here?" The drunk, still staring down, replied, "I think I just beat the shit out of a ghost." An older gentleman told me this joke this morning. A little guy is sitting at a counter eating breakfast. A big guy walks in and hits the little guy. "That's a judo chop from Japan," he says, and then walks into the bathroom. The little guy gets up and sits back down to finish his breakfast. The big guy comes back out of the bathroom and hits the little guy again. "That's a karate chop from Korea," he says. The little guy gets up and leaves the diner. The big guy sits down and orders breakfast. As he starts to eat, the little guy comes running back through the door and knocks the big guy out. He looks at the waitress and says, "When he wakes up, tell him that was a tire iron from Costco." Cheers to this joke. A businessman enters a tavern, sits down at the bar, and orders a double martini on the rocks. After he finishes the drink, he peeks inside his shirt pocket, then orders the bartender to prepare another double martini. After he finishes that, he again peeks inside his shirt pocket and orders the bartender to bring another double martini. The bartender says, "Look, buddy, I'll bring you martinis all night long, but you gotta tell me why you look inside your shirt pocket before you order a refill." The customer replies, "I'm peeking at a photo of my wife. When she starts to look good, I know it's time to go home." This joke is hilarious. There was once a sheep farmer who needed help with the difficult task of castrating some of his inferior male sheep to keep them from breeding with the females. He hired a French guy who didn't speak much English but was a very good worker. After the first day, they had successfully castrated 14 sheep, and his French worker was just about to throw away the parts. But the sheep farmer yelled, "No, don't throw those away. My wife fries them up and we eat them. They're delicious and we call them sheep fries." Later that day, the French hired hand came in for supper, and indeed, the sheep fries were tasty. The next day, they castrated 16 sheep, and the following evening, they all settled down to another supper of sheep fries. The third day, however, when the sheep farmer came home, he asked his wife where the French hired hand was, and she said, "You know, it's the weirdest thing. I told him since there weren't very many sheep fries this evening, we were also going to have French fries, and he ran like hell." Grandmas understand this joke. There was this really old guy at a dance who hadn't had any sex for a long time. He'd been dancing with the grandmas all night, but he still hadn't scored. Frustrated, he approached an old grandma and said, "Listen, I'm having no luck scoring a woman. How about coming back to my place? I'll give you $20 if you oblige." "I'm willing, let's go," she said. They arrived back at his place, and after a bit of foreplay, they headed for the bedroom. The old guy loved the sex and couldn't get over how tight the grandma was for such an old woman. Surely she's got to be a virgin. After the wonderful performance, he rolled over and said, "Wow, lady, if I had known you were a virgin, I would have given you $50. Surprised, she replied, "If I had known you were actually going to get an erection, I would have taken off my pantyhose." Due to a mix-up on Grammy night, Beyoncé, Rihanna, and Taylor Swift are forced to share a private jet in order to arrive in time for the ceremony. Once up in the air, Beyoncé pulls out a $1,000 bill and says, "I'm going to throw this $1,000 bill out the window and make someone down below very happy." Not to be outdone, Rihanna ripped a $1,000 bill in half and threw it out the window, saying, "Look, I just made two people really happy." Not even noticing Rihanna's stupid move, Taylor bragged, "Look, I'm going to throw 1,001 bills and make a lot more people a little happier." At this point, the pilot, who has overheard all this bragging and can't stand it anymore, comes out and says, "I think I'll throw all three of you out of this plane and make 350 million people happy." My mom was insulted by this joke. There once was a man who owned a sausage factory, and he was showing his arrogant, preppy son around his factory. Try as he might to impress his snobbish son, his son would just sneer. They approached the heart of the factory, where the father thought, "This should impress him." He showed his son a machine and said, "Son, this is the heart of the factory. With this machine here, we can put in a pig, and out come sausages." The prudish son, unimpressed, said, "Yes, but do you have a machine where you can put in a sausage and out comes a pig?" The father, furious, thought and said, "Yes, son, we call it your mother." This joke reminds me of old times. There is a factory in America which makes the Tickle Me Elmo toys. The toy laughs when you tickle it under the arm. A new employee is hired at the Tickle Me Elmo factory, and she reports for her first day promptly at 8 a.m. The next day at 8:45, there is a knock at the personnel manager's door. The foreman from the assembly line throws open the door and begins to rant about the new employee. He complains that she is incredibly slow and the whole line is backing up, putting the entire production line behind schedule. The personnel manager decides he should see this for himself, so the two men march down to the factory floor. When they get there, the line is so backed up that there are Tickle Me Elmos all over the factory floor, and they're really beginning to pile up. At the end of the line stands the new employee, surrounded by mountains of Tickle Me Elmos. She has a roll of plush red fabric and a huge bag of small marbles. The two men watch in amazement as she cuts a little piece of fabric, wraps it around two marbles, and begins to carefully sew the little package between Elmo's legs. The personnel manager bursts into laughter. After several minutes of hysteria, he pulls himself together and approaches the woman. "I'm sorry," he says to her, barely able to keep a straight face, "but I think you misunderstood the instructions I gave you yesterday. Your job is to give Elmo 2 test tickles."